Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy will not be alone during talks at the White House tomorrow. He'll be joined by several European leaders. The summit in Alaska between President Trump and his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, aimed to end the war in Ukraine. Following their meeting, President Trump posted on social media that the best way to end the conflict is to go directly to a peace agreement rather than pursuing a ceasefire deal, a position he previously championed. Joining us to discuss all this is White House correspondent Franco Ordonez. Good morning, Franco.
Good morning, Aisha.
So what stood out to you during Friday's summit?
I mean, I think one big thing was kind of just the spectacle of it, as you'd really expect for leaders of two superpowers. I mean, the choreographed handshake, the exaggerated smiles. I mean, you've been there for these things as well. But one thing that was different was that B-2 bomber flyover as they walked the red carpet, which is some experts see as kind of a message of power that Trump was trying to send Putin. Another thing that stood out to me was how the talks didn't really seem to yield anything concrete. They didn't take any questions, which is very odd for Trump. And Trump touted all this great progress, but he didn't say about what. I mean, it's really very clear that still so much needs to be worked out.
President Trump says he wants to end the war in Ukraine, but do we have any more of a sense of how the president might pursue that goal?
Well, I mean, we should remember, as you pointed out, that he said repeatedly if he didn't get a ceasefire during the talks, he'd be very unhappy. He also warned that there would be serious consequences. Neither of those things happened or appear to be happening. Instead, he appears somewhat to be reversing course. I mean, Trump appears to be moving straight to negotiating a broader peace deal, which is Putin's preferred approach. And Putin has long demanded territory in the east of Ukraine that Russia has already gained control of. I will note, though, that Trump allegedly told European leaders that in exchange that he was open to offering U.S. security guarantees to Ukraine. That's according to a report in the Wall Street Journal. Now, that would be significant for the Trump administration, as it has resisted several times of making any type of security guarantees before, saying that was Europe's job.
Ukraine's leader, President Zelenskyy, will be at the White House for talks along with other European leaders. I mean, this is a big moment. What can we expect?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can expect a somewhat tough and maybe very uncomfortable meeting. I mean, let's remember the last time Zelenskyy was in the Oval Office. He got lectured by Trump as well as the vice president. As you know, he's got some backup this time. Several European and NATO leaders will be joining Zelenskyy, including the European Union chief Ursula von der Leyen and French President Emmanuel Macron, as well as the NATO Secretary General. But Trump has already made clear that he was going to push Zelenskyy to make a deal, and that would likely mean giving up Ukrainian territory. And that seems like it's going to be really tough for Zelenskyy to do. Zelenskyy has said emphatically that Ukraine will not give up land to an occupier. That said, he did say, Zelenskyy that is, that he's open to a trilateral summit with Russia, Ukraine, and the U.S.
And finally, here in D.C., more National Guard troops are being deployed, following the Trump administration's decision to take over the Capitol's police force. What more do we know?
Yeah, there's going to be several hundred, maybe as many as 1,000 arriving from 3 Republican-led states, West Virginia, South Carolina, Ohio. This as protests continue against Trump's efforts to take over law enforcement. There was a protest yesterday where hundreds marched to the White House. The response here in D.C. has been quite mixed. Local officials are, trying to send a message that they'll work with the federal government as they're required to do based on local rules, but also expressing concern that the Trump administration is overreaching in its efforts. They did get a partial win, though, when Trump administration announced they were at least partially backing
I will give it to you in a minute. Shut the door.
DC force, but they're doubling down on the National Guard.
That's NPR White House correspondent Franco Ordonez. Thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you.
Shut the door!
And tomorrow, the Capitol will play host to that all-important meeting on Ukraine. For a sense of how it might unfold, we're joined now by Sam Green. He's a professor of Russian politics at King's College London. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
So, what will President Zelenskyy want from tomorrow's talks with President Trump?
Well, it looks like he's got the first thing that he really wants, which is not to be alone in the room. As Franco mentioned, the memory in everybody's mind will be fresh of what happened earlier this year.
I know.
He will want to really see the solidarity from the European side, not just that they are there with him, but that they are prepared to put European muscle behind some kind of a deal. He will really want to know how serious Trump is, and really how serious Putin is about allowing some kind of a reassurance force or a peacekeeping force, including Europeans and potentially Americans on the ground and in the skies over Ukraine, to create a real deterrence against renewed Russian aggression.
Well, what concessions do you think Ukraine may be prepared to make to reach a peace deal?
Well, look, the Ukrainians have been clear that they need a ceasefire before they can get to a peace deal. If what the Russians and at this point the Americans are asking the Ukrainians to consider is a ceding of territory, a formal recognition on some level of Russian control over the territory it has occupied through the course of this war, they will need to go through a political process to do that. Right? It would be difficult in any case to get support for it, but it requires a referendum. That's something that can only happen after the fighting stops and martial law can be lifted and there can be a democratic campaign on that referendum. So there are things that have to happen before they can even talk about those sorts of concessions.
Well, what do you think Europe's role might be in any deal that they're trying to reach?
Well, that really depends on how hard the Trump administration is prepared to push to get the deal that it sees now that it has from Trump, right? The question I think the Europeans have been grappling with really since the beginning of this administration is, will they be allowed to create the security that they feel that they need, not just for the Ukrainians, but for themselves? This is a war on the European continent that they worry could expand if Russia is not deterred. So the question is, are they simply filling the gaps from a U.S. drawdown in support for Ukraine, or will they actually face active resistance? So this is, I think, a mission to, again, feel out where Trump is on this, what he is willing to do, and again, how real this promise is, or potential promise is, to allow the U.S. and NATO as such to participate in creating security for Ukraine.
How big a deal is it that Trump seems to be backing away from the call for a ceasefire and kind of aligning with Russia on looking for just a peace deal?
Well, it will feel quite significant, obviously, to the Ukrainians and the Europeans. I think we've thought for a long time this is probably where Trump was headed. He wants an end to this war as quickly as possible in a format that would allow him to get back to some kind of a normalized relationship with Russia. I think he fundamentally sees this war as a nuisance. So anything that could end it permanently and then allow for the drawdown of sanctions and the broader normalization of relations, I think fits his strategy. He likely will continue to find, as he has over the last 7 months, that is much easier said than done.
Well, how do you think that President Putin views this moment?
I think Putin is probably quietly ecstatic. I mean, he was very happy to get the summit in Anchorage. It was exactly what he wanted. It got him out of Trump's doghouse after about a month and a half of consistent frustration. It got him out of the diplomatic isolation that he had been in, and it happened without the Ukrainians and the Europeans in the room. It also seems to have maneuvered Trump into agreeing with the plan that Putin has been talking about all along, and one that really does not require much in the way of concessions, if any, from the Russian side. So what he will be looking for is how hard now will Trump push? Will the commitment that may have been made quietly in Anchorage, will that turn into leverage exerted by Trump over America's allies in Europe and over the Ukrainians?
So what do you ultimately think may come out of this? I mean, do you think we're close to reaching some sort of agreement?
It's really hard to know. There's nothing there's nothing visible at the moment that suggests that we are closer than we have been in the past, with the one exception of this idea that Putin may have acquiesced to the idea of Europeans and Americans on the ground providing security for Ukraine. That is not the same thing as a peace deal, but it is the kind of thing that could make it possible for the Ukrainians to accept a ceasefire. What they want to be reassured of is that Russia will not easily be able to breach this ceasefire if it emerges, as they have been able to do in the past.
That's Sam Green, professor of Russian politics and also director for democratic resilience at the Center for European Policy Analysis. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
In the United Kingdom, police have been arresting a record number of protesters this summer. The demonstrators have come out in support of a pro-Palestinian group now banned under British anti-terrorism laws. But the high number of arrests has raised concerns that freedom of speech is under attack, as NPR's Fatima Al-Kassab reports.
Police wrestle handcuffs onto protesters in front of Parliament, arresting supporters of Palestine Action, a group which Britain's Home Secretary told reporters this month is behind
violent attacks, including injuries, including weapons, smoke bombs, causing panic among innocent people.
Palestine Action is a protest group which mainly vandalizes weapons factories supplying parts to Israel. When the group broke into a military base in England and sprayed paint on some Royal Air Force planes, the government declared them a terrorist organisation, making membership or support of the group a crime, punishable by up to 14 years in jail. But every weekend, cities across the UK have nevertheless filled with people expressing support for the group and
cannot
getting
miss this
arrested
red
for
garbage
it.
can in
I
front of
spoke
a
to one
white
of
door.
the terror suspects.
Everything is
Here I am,
moved.
81 years old, on bail.
You have to start dropping that in that bag.
Deborah Hinton is a retired British magistrate who has previously been interviewed on
Can't
local
leave one in
radio
there, 'cause
about
guess
her
what?
gardening skills.
Dogs.
On July the 19th, she was arrested on the steps of her local cathedral for holding a placard reading, "I support Palestine Action."
A whole lot of very scarily dressed policemen went down the line and they arrested us. And I must say that was pretty terrifying. I was shaking so uncontrollably.
This was Hinton's first brush with the law. In the past, she's been honoured by Queen Elizabeth for her services to her local community.
The average age, I think, was well over 70. I mean, we were a respectable lot of people sitting there with placards in total silence.
Her fellow detainees this summer include vicars, retired teachers, and even one of King Charles's former advisors. Most have been senior
I might have
citizens.
somebody interested right
The
now in
UK's
that
independent
fucking-
watchdog of terrorism laws, Jonathan Hall, told the
just
BBC
trying
the
to figure
law
out
applies
what
to
they
everyone
mean.
equally.
Whether you look like a sort of, if you like, I use the phrase a hairy foreigner, or you're some nice white old lady sitting in the road.
Many of these nice old ladies were protesting about the war in Gaza before Palestine Action was banned. But many more have come out because they're worried the ban endangers their civil liberties. That's Lord Peter Haines' concern as well. He's a lawmaker in the House of Lords from the ruling centre-left Labour Party and a former government minister.
When I was Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, I dealt with serious terrorists. Palestine Action, whether you agree with it or not, and I've never supported any of its activities, is not a terrorist organisation. It's not like
My buddy's
Al-Qaeda.
band. Brian's
Haines
band.
also
Look.
spent many years campaigning
This is
against
Brian Gordon.
apartheid in South Africa.
We would have been designated
Him and I
as
used to be
terrorists.
very
So would the
close.
suffragettes campaigning for
We kinda
votes for
separated
women
because, you know,
a century ago in
he
Britain.
got my
They did things
ex-girlfriend there.
far, far
Sucking
worse
off at a party.
than Palestine Action have ever done.
Well, she
The
was my
UN
girlfriend
has
at the
called on
time.
Britain to scrap the ban. Amnesty International
I was
has
like,
called
bro,
it a
what are you
threat to
fucking
freedom
doing,
of
man?
expression. Palestine Action
Well, I
has
wanted to see how
appealed its
good she
terrorism
was.
label, and London's High Court has said a hearing on that can go ahead for November. Meanwhile, Deborah Hinton.
It's just not that close.
The 81-year-old on bail for terrorism is keeping herself busy with her volunteer work while she awaits word on whether she'll go to jail.
I try not to think about it because it's a bit of a gloomy prospect. I've got a grandson who's 22 months old. I want him to grow up in a country where there's freedom of speech.
And she's prepared to go to jail for that. Fatima Al-Kassab, NPR News, London.